Conversation with Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
Morning, it's 3 minutes after 9 on Wednesday, the 19th of January. And this hour, your opportunity to put your calls to Andy Burnham, the Manchester Mayor, and of course, we'll continue to reflect ahead of Prime Minister's questions this idea of the supposed plot to try and topple the Prime Minister. And indeed, that plays into our conversation because it's fair to say, until the series of many would say unforced own goals or errors, while Sir Keir Starmer has worked hard to get the Labour Party back into some kind of electoral position, it was thought perhaps he didn't have the punch to get through. Many people thought that the next man who would be the Labour leader and Labour Prime Minister is the man from whom you're about to hear. And they pointed to his considerable experience when he was down here in Westminster. Health Secretary, Culture, Media and Sports Secretary, Chief Secretary of the Treasury. But it has to be said, he seems very happy doing what he does as the elected Mayor of Greater Manchester. Andy Burnham joins me now. I don't want to start with a fight, but it's great to welcome you. Are you the second city, or does Birmingham actually own that title in your view? Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
I think London's the second city.
Oh, here we go. Nice one to open up.
Yeah, good to be with you, though.
Good to have you on board. Before we get into the first question, Helen, coming to you in just a moment, I've got to get a view from you. You're witnessing events. You will know many of the people involved on both sides concerning what Boris Johnson is saying. He and his colleagues pointing to the Sue Gray report. I don't know what they think they're going to find, but just an interpretation from where you are up in Manchester with your colleagues there. Mr. Mayor.
Well, it's honestly hard to see how the Prime Minister survives from here. And I say that, Nick, not because I revel in witch hunts. I know how hard jobs are at that level of government. And obviously I've seen the Prime Minister at close quarters doing his job. It's difficult, but these are big misjudgments, aren't they? When you're saying to the country you can't attend funerals, you can't go in hospital to see your dying mum, to then say yesterday no one told me what the rules were. I mean, that really isn't good enough at all. Yes, we can wait for the Sue Gray report, and perhaps we should, Nick, but I just would say I can't see how he does survive from here.
Lastly, before the call, were he to take himself up to Piccadilly Station and go and see the constituents at Hayward and Middleton, which is currently held by his colleague Chris Clarkson, or Lee, currently held by James Grundy, what would the people of those areas tell him, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think they feel strongly about it, Nick, because that point that the Prime Minister made about they had lent their votes to him, I don't think that loan has been repaid at all. So it's interesting, isn't it, that the 2019 MPs, the so-called Red Wall MPs, are leading the rebellion. I think that's because they feel there's been a failure to honour promises on levelling up, as well as the observing of the rules on the pandemic. So I think it's interesting that the rebellion is coming from there. You might remember, Nick, the Prime Minister came to Manchester days within taking office and promised a new railway line between Manchester and Leeds. And we have been told before Christmas that we're not getting that. So it's things like that, actually, that are also in the background here. There's a failure to deliver on levelling up. There's a failure to deliver for the north of England. And I think that's all playing into the situation that we're in.
Let's explore matters in your own area and, of course, more broadly as well. Helen is Henley-on-Thames. You're through to the Mayor of Manchester. Go ahead. Helen, morning to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a question for Mr. Burnham. I'm normally a Conservative voter, but I'm really tired of this merry-go-round of different Conservative leaders who neither have any charisma or they don't have any integrity. And I think that I don't care anymore about Conservative, Labour, Lib Dem or the labels. I would like somebody, and I think others would, with integrity, vision, charisma and experience, but also the ability to pull together the potential of the whole country, because that's how Great Britain became great, who's got passion and belief. And I think that could be you, Mr. Burnham. And you would get Helen from Henley and lots like me voting for you, I think. So I'm asking you, when will you be leaving the Town Hall of Manchester and going into the Palace of Westminster? Because much as Mr. Keir Starmer is a very nice chap, he wouldn't get my vote because there's not enough passion there.
There's not enough passion, but you have the charisma. Sir Keir is a good bloke, but he's not going to cut it for Helen. Mr. Mayor.
Well, obviously, thank you, Helen. Very, very kind words, and I appreciate them. But I think the word you used there was integrity, and I think the current leader of the Labour Party does have that in considerable amounts, to be honest, and it's what's needed right now. So, I mean, I'm very happy, as Nick said at the start, doing what I'm doing here. I appreciate what you said. I feel part of the problem, actually, is too much focused on Westminster. It's just a dysfunctional environment, and I think we'll be a happier country and we'll work better politically where there's more power out of Westminster and actually less tribal approach to politics where people work across party lines at more city or region level. And I think that is part of the mix here. So it's not, as you say, just constantly about changing the person at the top and moving the deck chairs. That isn't working for anybody. It's a bit like Everton Football Club.
We're coming to that.
At the moment, isn't it? You can
Don't
keep changing the person at the top, but actually there's something fundamentally not right down below as well.
I've got a question lined up for you. And
but Helen, thank you for what you said anyway.
Let me just ask you this, though. Helen, thank you. A very famous mayor of a different city once said if the ball were to come out of the back of the scrum as regards being party leader. Can I say the same of you? If the ball were to come out of the back, not the scrum with you, of course, out of a tackle, was played into midfield, it's something you would be interested in?
Not right now, but
not
perhaps
right now,
later down the line. I've said that. I'm not going to change my story on that. You know, I'm very much committed to serving a full second term here in Greater Manchester. I think we're building something really important. I think this is about building a healthier approach to politics in Britain, Nick. But I'll just be honest and say, if years down the line that opportunity arose, I'm not going to turn my face away from it.
Helen, thanks for getting us started. Murdo is in Fife. Your question to the Mayor of Manchester. Morning, Murdo.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning.
Morning, Murdo.
Andy, how you doing? Andy, in your re-election campaign to become Mayor of Greater Manchester in May, did you and your campaign team have a beer in your offices, and was Sir Keir Starmer wrong?
This is when he visited Durham and had a beer and a takeaway food with the MP in Durham there and some party workers. The number thought to total about 6. There is one school of thought that is akin to the Prime Minister's, single quotes, crime. Mr. Mayor.
I can't remember doing that, Murdo, to be honest. We didn't really work much out of a campaign office in this recent election because of obviously everybody in the position that we were in. I think the problem we've got here with what's been on some front pages recently is that the sense that there's equivalence between what happened in Durham and what happened at Downing Street, and there really isn't. And it's a clear tactic, isn't it? I mean, that is often what happens, isn't it? When the Tories are in trouble, they try and say, oh, well, everyone's as bad as us. Well, there's no equivalence there to me. And
Why is it not the same having a drink in a constituency office with 5-6 colleagues, the same as having a drink outside with 7 people sat round a table?
I think if you're sitting at work, Nick, and you're working and you have a drink as part of that, you're kind of taking on board a drink as a quick break. I think that is different, isn't it? It's a work environment. It's very different to be asking 100 people to come to the Downing Street garden with their own booze in their hand. I mean, that is a very different thing, and I think most people can see that.
Murdo, thank you. Chrissy, appropriately enough, in Manchester, your call to your mayor. Chrissy, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking the call.
Hi, Christy.
Andy, as Mayor of Greater Manchester, you've got devolved powers from central government for transport in Manchester. So why have you decided for the CAS to cover the whole of Greater Manchester? That's all 495 miles, and that is the largest in Europe. That is down to you. That's not the government. They set the guidelines. You've set the size. People are very angry in Manchester, and they feel very betrayed. Do you accept that you've made a mistake?
Just to help listeners, Chris's point is CAS is the clean air zone. As I understand it, you'll know, Mr. Mayor, it is set to be the largest scheme of its type and one of the biggest in the world. It launches in May of this year. Some highly polluting vehicles could be charged £60 per day to drive into the area, which takes in towns that all listeners will have heard of, such as Bury and Oldham. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, and address Chris's point.
No, you're right. And Chrissy, puts the
it's
point.
It's Chrissy, Mr. Mayor.
Chrissy, sorry.
That's my pronunciation. Chrissy, go ahead.
Puts the case very forcibly. I mean, this is going to sound, as though I'm just trying to deflect, but this is the truth of the matter, Nick. It's the law of the land that we have to have air that's clean enough for people to breathe. And in Greater Manchester, there are 152 sites that have been in breach of air quality standards. And as a result of that, the UK government served a legal direction on each of the individual councils of Greater Manchester. So all those places you mentioned, Bury, Wigan, Oldham, all received individually the legal direction to clean up the air. And so it actually isn't my choice or the council's choice. We've been told to do it.
Well, not that size, presumably, Mr. Mayor, to bring up Chris's point.
Well, but no, that is a fair point. And let me just explain this, Nick. There are 150 sites, though, where the air quality breaches legal standards. So you could have an approach where you have 152 mini clean air zones in those localities. The view of myself and the councils was that would be unworkable because nobody would know where those zones started and ended. And actually, they would then displace the polluted air to the areas around them, and the boundaries would keep moving. So Greater Manchester took the view that it was not a workable solution. The charging clean air zone was basically an instruction from the government. That was their default option, and they said that was what we had to consider. People compare us to Birmingham, and Birmingham do have a smaller clean air zone, Nick, but they included cars, and we think that obviously is a different thing, and we had a vote against that here many years ago, and we didn't think that was the right thing to do. The reason why all of this is really going to have to be reviewed, in my view, Nick, is because there's been a big change in the vehicle market. We were going to help people to change their vehicle so they would pay no charge. And actually, the aim of this scheme isn't to raise any money. I know people won't believe that, but that is what we're trying to do. We're just trying to clean up the air.
Why charge £60, Mr. Mayor, if it's not about making money?
Because it's an incentive, Nick, to get people to change their vehicle, and there's financial support available for people to change their vehicle.
Well, let's go back to Chrissy.
The cost of vehicles has risen, and so many people would be stuck paying that charge, and it's why the 10 Greater Manchester councils are meeting tomorrow to consider putting this back to government to say, look, this isn't workable in its current form. And that's the truth of the matter of where we're up to, Nick.
OK, let's go back to Chrissy. I just need to make all my listeners aware. I understand there's been a Go Slow protest held on a motorway. In one protest, farmers brought sheep and a pony on a bus from Bolton to Bury, and there have been other rallies with local taxi drivers. Chrissy, you are in the city. Back to you and a response to what you heard from your mayor.
Right, it's not about pollution. It can't be. The majority of Greater Manchester checked on BBC News about air pollution, and the road came back as a grade 1. So please explain to me how taxing people will clean up air pollution. How?
Do you think this is to raise money?
Literally taxing us for fresh air.
Chrissy, do you think this is a revenue-raising exercise then? Is that what you're accused? OK.
Yeah, because you can't move out of Bury. You cannot move out of Greater Manchester without hitting a camera. There is no route round. You have literally got us.
I have to say, Mr. Mayor, the number of texts and tweets and emails that are coming in support of what Chris is saying, now that doesn't mean they're right, but you're clearly, this is a very controversial policy that you're championing.
It is, and as I say, I'm not necessarily championing it, I'm trying to make it work. It's a government instruction, I've got to try and...
Again, the way you interpret is down to you and your
I've got to try and make it work. But I actually agree with what Chris is saying, in that people won't be able to avoid it in the current circumstances. We don't want to tax people. We want people to have cleaner vehicles so that therefore our air is clean and our kids can breathe properly in the playground. That is what we are trying to do, Nick. This isn't about raising money in the long term. I can say to you now, I would never recommend that cars should be included in this, and I would never recommend that this turns into a congestion charge where people have to pay to use the roads. This is purely about helping people get cleaner vehicles so that therefore the air becomes compliant with legal standards. And as it stands, Chrissy is right, some people will be left paying the charge because the cost of vehicles has risen quite significantly, Nick, over the last year. It's why Greater Manchester is going back to the government, and we're saying to them, the straitjacket you've put us in with regard to this really isn't going to work for us or for anybody here. Okay. And we need to work jointly with you to get a fairer solution. And that is where the truth of where we currently are, Nick. I know it sounds like I'm trying to sort of, push this in different directions. It's a complicated issue, and that's where we are.
Chrissy, we will leave it to now. I sense this is a story to which we shall return, and I'm damn certain Manchester shall return as well as it goes on. Chrissy, thank you for your call. Greg in Crouch End in London. Greg, you're through to the Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. Good morning, Greg.
Morning, Andy. Morning, Nick.
Hi, Greg.
Andy, what would your question be to Boris at today's first question to Boris if you were leader of the opposition today?
That's a sensational question, Greg.
Isn't it time to go?
And he would then refer you to, we're getting vaccinations done at a record rate. We must focus on bringing this country out of this record employment. He would respond. He would,
but it's clear that he's losing the support of people, both in the country but also closer to home in his own party. And we're still in desperate need of leadership, Nick. And I think recent days have kind of been quite depressing, really, where the BBC has become a sacrificial lamb in what is it? Operation Save what Big Dog or whatever it is. I mean, it's
Red meat or Save Big Dog, whichever you prefer.
What would it? What is going to be thrown into the mix here to try and save Big Dog's skin? I mean, it's just we're not in a good position, are we, as a country right now? And I just think it's a case sometimes, isn't it, of saying isn't it time to hear what people are saying and not just clinging on to the Sue Gray report. I mean, I'm prepared to wait for that report if that's what the Prime Minister wants to do, but there has to be a full reckoning when that report is published.
I was going to actually ask you about the BBC, Mr. Mayor, because just reminding my listeners, of course, with the fact that the BBC have massive production facilities up in Salford near you, it's arguably one of the biggest centres of TV production possibly in the whole of Europe, now under open attack from the government. You're the Mayor of Manchester. Many people live and work on your watch. What would you say to Boris Johnson and his colleagues about their attack on their perceived attack on the BBC?
This is a British success story. And, we need British success stories, don't we, now? Why undermine it? Why undermine it for your own political purposes? Of course, the BBC can change in one way or another. But if you were to undermine the BBC, you would undermine Media City in Salford, and we would lose jobs in the north of England. So I would say pull back, and it would seem the Culture Secretary was pulling back in the Commons. It's not the way, is it, to decide the future of a great British institution by sending out a tweet at the weekend. The BBC, actually, whatever your listeners feel about them, Nick, they do deserve better than that. And obviously, alongside the BBC, they're threatening now to privatise Channel 4, and they're going to go to Leeds, and that's another negative story for the North. It's why these MPs are getting very annoyed, Nick. They were elected with the Prime Minister and Conservatives making a lot of promises to people here, and they aren't being delivered. And that's very much the backdrop to what's going on down in Westminster.
Let's take another. Thank you, Greg. Another call, again in Manchester. Malcolm, you're through to your Mayor. Good morning, Malcolm.
Yeah, hiya, Andy.
Hi, Malcolm.
Yeah, glad to see you're worried about the well-being and health of people in Manchester, and really bringing your focus back now to home. Do you know how many people died yesterday, died with COVID in Manchester, in Manchester hospitals? Do you know how many?
I don't have the figure
No.
to hand.
Okay,
No.
you don't know. Okay, so obviously not so worried about health and well-being of Manchester people.
No, I am.
Do you know how many,
there's a time lag on that data.
Listen,
Okay.
do you know how many people are currently on ventilators, on life support, Manchester people in Manchester hospitals at the moment? Do you
Yes,
know
I
how
do.
Many?
Yes, I
How
do.
many?
Yeah, so
How
it's
many?
about 52.
No, it's 23, actually. That's your statistics on your website.
Can I ask, Malcolm,
do you know
where
how many...
look, I'm all for detail. I think I'm probably known for that. And notwithstanding that you're trying to highlight that you think the Mayor should have a greater fix on this, can I ask where we're going with these questions?
Yeah, what
Thank
I
you,
want
sir.
to know is,
Ah.
you've seen Novak has been deported. He's not welcome in Australia to play sports. You've got Manchester United, Manchester City players who are vaccine deniers, not hesitating. We're past all that. They are vaccine deniers. You've got the manager, Ralph Rangnick, dismissing vaccination.
Okay, I'm going to rein it because I'm a little bit nervous, but I get the thrust of your question, Malcolm, and I'm grateful. Two massive football clubs, I don't need to tell you the importance that they have, not just here in the United Kingdom, indeed across the whole of the country. I'm not familiar with which players have or have not had the vaccine, but there will be it's fair of Malcolm to suggest many haven't. Should there be mandating of major sports personnel to have their vaccines? Mr. Mayor.
Do you know, I'm strongly in favour of the vaccination programme, Nick. And you mentioned before I'm a former health secretary, so I always come down on the side of putting people's health first. But, I've pulled back on mandatory vaccination. I wouldn't recommend it for Premier League footballers or indeed for NHS staff. And that is a more current question, isn't it? Because they are being required to have a vaccination by the early part of February or face termination, not redundancy, Nick, termination of their job. Now, personally, I think in the circumstances we're in, that is the wrong move from the government.
Mr. Mayor, sadly, I don't have one. But if my dear old mum was still alive, why shouldn't I be safe in the knowledge that the fantastic staff treating her had all had the relevant jabs?
Because the vast majority of NHS staff will take the jab, and there are some people who, for their own personal reasons, will decide not to. I think the risks can be managed through lateral flow testing of people in that position. So I'm just being straight with you. I think it's risky for the NHS to force, let's say, I don't know, perhaps 5% of staff into a position where they're being told get the jab or lose your job. Given all of the pressures on the NHS right now. So there's a moral dimension to this, but there's also a very practical dimension to this situation, Nick. And just on the point that was raised at the start, I mean, there's a lag on death data.
Yep.
So I mean, I couldn't, and I wouldn't know that. In terms of the critical care and ventilation, the latest figure I had, we had around 50 people in high dependency or critical care, but obviously Malcolm seems to have different figures.
Yeah, indeed. Just to clarify, as a former health secretary, you would not mandate. You would encourage and offer every opportunity to NH staff, but you would not mandate that NH staff must have the vaccine or be terminated.
I wouldn't.
OK, all right.
I wouldn't.
And just to clarify, just so we know, Manchester United, Ralph Rangnick, if I'm saying that correctly, has actually urged all fans and teams follow medical advice and be vaccinated. Let's just get out there. So I think that was slightly misquoted. OK, Phil is in Penrith. You're through to the Mayor of Manchester. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning.
Hi,
Morning,
Phil.
Andy.
Good morning, Phil.
I've written you lots of letters, haven't I?
I'm sure the Mayor is in receipt of it. Give him another clue.
All right, Eccles Old Street. Why are you not building on it?
Eccles Old Street or All Street, sir? Which was
Eccles
that?
Hall Street.
Eccles
in
Hall
Clayton,
Street.
Manchester 11.
You have written to the Mayor.
Site. Been sat derelict for 45 years.
Right, and you think it should be used for what, sir? Housing?
I think it should be used for housing where people don't need cars. It's well served by buses and trams.
Eccles Hall Street. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, well, it's principally a matter for the City Council, I think, as you're indicating there, Phil. When people look around Greater Manchester and they see brownfield sites, you can find a lot that are just sitting there and people say, well, it's been like that for years. The reason often two reasons. One is that the contamination on the site is considerable from the former industry that was there, and it can cost a lot of money to clean it up before it can be redeveloped. But often you have developers who are just land banking. They're holding the site for whatever reason, and they don't want to bring it forward. So, I mean,
do you have a housing shortage or issue in Greater Manchester, Mr.
Absolutely, we do.
Does that not need to be addressed? I mean, I don't know about this particular potential development, but surely that needs to be addressed. You need to be encouraging developers or builders or local authority to clean the land in some fashion.
We absolutely, though, we are, Nick. If you come to City Centre Manchester now, I don't know how often you come, but
I was there for the conference, not been since last
Yeah, and I bet you thought it looked different.
Every time I come up, it seems a little more life in it.
Yeah, and we are building, and some people will say, well, those are very expensive homes, and some of them are, but Manchester City Council have taken a decision. They're building more homes for social rent north of Manchester Victoria Station particularly, but in other parts of the city as well. We've got a huge scheme going on with the regeneration of Stockport Town Centre, 3,500 homes being built there. Right. So Greater Manchester actually is building and it's changing. But in the particular site you mentioned, Phil, I'll take another look.
Can I ask you to take a look when you've, at some point later today or in the week, you at least have one of your team have a look at that particular development?
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Mr.
Always.
Mayor. A text question. Can you ask the Mayor his thoughts on how well the new Chief Constable, Stephen Watson, is doing? Does he feel confident the force will be taken out of special measures? Does the Mayor think rank-and-file constables currently carrying so much as 50 investigations at once allow for the force to provide good service to the victims? Many officers on the ground level feel they're drowning with the workload. I sense that's probably someone who's in the GMP, actually.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor.
It sounds like it. And, I absolutely kind of sympathise with the position that they're in because, we have lost officers over recent times. To directly answer the question, yes, I think we have the right leader now for Greater Manchester Police. He has my complete confidence. He set out a plan that I think also is commanding the confidence of the Greater Manchester public. He's talked of doubling the number of arrests. He's talked of making sure every burglary has a personal attendance, that people get a physical visit from an officer. That is what we want to hear, I think. It's what the public...
Do you want coppers carrying 50 investigations on their books, though, Mr. Mayor?
Well, here's the thing, then, Nick. And there's a consequence for what I just said, isn't there? That creates workload and pressure, and I understand the pressure that's felt by the fantastic officers who work for Greater Manchester Police and civilian staff. So I've taken a difficult decision, Nick, to apply the full precept increase this year. £10, which will go with some of the government funding that's now coming in, and we are recruiting police officers. We will have about 1,000 extra officers on my watch by the time this latest increase has come through, and that is repairing the damage of the cuts that we had around a decade ago where we lost 2,000. So we're on with the job of repairing Greater Manchester Police, and the new Chief Constable, in my view, is talking the language of the people of Greater Manchester, and he's got their confidence. We just now need to see delivery. And I am confident that this police force will come out of special measures in a matter of, hopefully not years, certainly a matter of months.
Let's stay with policing matters. Sam in Leeds, just across the country there. Your question to the Mayor. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, both of you.
Hi, Sam.
The UK is the largest exporter of medical cannabis products in the world, although only 3 NHS prescriptions since 2018 have been granted to patients. Meanwhile, those who can afford to pay privately for cannabis and cannabis products can go privately to highly strict clinics. So I'd like to know what Mr Burnham thinks about Sadiq Khan's new trial, and what he would also say to the millions of medical cannabis users in the UK who cannot get NHS access and risk criminalisation for their choice of drug or medicine. Would we not be better to look at countries like Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, and indeed America, various states, all who are looking to increase adult access to cannabis?
And just to remind my listeners, there's a pilot being put forward by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in 3 boroughs, Greenwich, Lewisham and Bexley, where a certain age group, 18 through 24, it will be more dealt with, soft drugs, I hasten to add, more dealt with as if it were a lower league driving offence, so a very different tack, not necessarily endorsed by Sir Keir Starmer. Mr Mayor.
Well, I'm cautious naturally on drug reform more widely, Nick. We'll certainly be taking a look at the London pilot, but it is from a position of caution. However, let me come to the question of the medicinal use of cannabis. I think there is a much stronger case to be made for people with certain conditions being able to access those medicines and not having to turn to the black market. On that point, I am sympathetic, and I think there does need to be a relaxation so that those patients, I think it's sometimes people with conditions like multiple sclerosis, those type of conditions who know that the treatment can bring huge relief. I think that is something sensibly and morally we should be considering it.
Last couple of questions from me. Do you, I would imagine like much of the country, welcome the news that Go North West have been able to find an accommodation to allow Tracy Scholes, who's been a bus driver, she's from Rochdale, she's been a bus driver for more than 30 years, back behind the driving wheel. Do you welcome the news?
I definitely do. I couldn't believe what they were doing, to be honest, trying to force her out. But yeah, it's fantastic. It's a victory for common sense there. So I think we all celebrate Tracy's win this week, don't we?
Did you celebrate Tony Blair becoming Sir Tony Blair? Was that the right move?
Celebrate. I don't think I particularly ever celebrate anybody being honoured.
Is it the right award?
I think so, given service to the country. I know other people see it differently. But I think if you look back at Tony Blair's time in government, in many ways this country moved forward. Other people would say not. I saw him at close quarters giving what was, huge service to the country. I always, the way I look at it, Nick, our government didn't get everything right, and I know you're probably the first to say that. And if I would admit that we should have regulated buses, we should have built more council housing. I could list a lot of things that we should have done that we didn't do. However, I look back at the country at the time of London 2012, and that was the country that Labour left behind. And I believe personally that Tony Blair played a role in that. Gordon Brown played a role in that. And I think we were in a better place when we were at that period in our history. And I do think we need to get back to a position here where there are stronger standards within government, where Britain is seen more positively on the world stage. And that's my view. And for people who contributed to that, giving them recognition through the honours system, I think is appropriate.
Let's finish with the arrival of a new member to the Labour Party, a big figure in Manchester. He's on the red side of town, Gary Neville. Now, Sir Keir Starmer was with me on Monday for Call Keir and LBC, and I asked him about the possibility of one day Mr Neville becoming a Labour candidate. Here, Mr Burnham, is his response. One day, Gary Neville as a candidate, possible runner for Manchester Mayor. God, he brings Manchester Mayor.
Well, look,
if Andy Burnham went on to do something else, who knows what?
I think. Andy fancies himself as a footballer as well. Andy's a good, forward in any football game. So, if nothing else, I'm assembling a fine team.
But you'd be happy to see Mr Neville put forward as a candidate if the local Labour Party.
Gary should go as far as he wants to. I'm delighted that he wants to join Team Labour, and it's vindication, I think, that that we're changing the Labour Party, and now what I'm hearing more and more is people who want to be associated with us, want to join us, and that is a good thing.
I understand you play up front in the team. So you'd love to see Neville at the back, Gary Neville at the back, wouldn't you?
I've played in a game with him not so long ago, and I think I had to carry him through that game. So,
oh, I see.
But no, it's great news that he's on board. He certainly brings a bit of life to politics, doesn't he, Gary? So I think, I would echo everything Keir just said.
And finally, as a lifelong massive Evertonian Everton fan, Wayne Rooney, is he the future of the club?
So we've dealt with the easy stuff, Nick, haven't we, through this?
Furious
and now
voters,
you're getting into
not knowing numbers, not knowing developments, but here comes the big one.
You're getting into the real difficult, real intractable stuff now, Everton Football Club. Oh, my goodness. I mean, it's been a tough time. I mean, I'll be honest and say I struggled to warm to the appointment of the previous manager, but we've got at least a bit of temporary respite. Duncan Ferguson in charge on Saturday, and I think the country will say, why isn't he in charge of the whole place? The country, because Duncan brings a certain fight and passion to things. So Goodison will definitely be rocking come Saturday, but we need like the country, Nick. I think we need a long-term, sensible, steady appointment, and I think
you're bidding for Boris Johnson there for the Everton manager. I doubt that. So, Andy, I must leave it there for time reasons. Thank you for your time. Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, appearing here on LBC, where the news is next.
From Global's newsroom, I'm Holly Harris. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, has told Nick Boris Johnson is facing a rebellion by his newest MPs because he failed to deliver on his election promises on levelling up. A group of Tories in the Commons in the so-called Red Wall seats met yesterday to discuss the row over lockdown parties